Well, I want to thank Melissa Carter and her interns, as well as our group. We have a lot of our members here today who helped with it, and Bob hosting us, and Heather drafting, and Lamar. But we were a very active group, and we've done some very good work. We broke them down into categories, so I'm going to talk a little bit about safety first. One of the things that we did as part of our subgroup is have Andy Barkley come in and talk to us about predictive analytics. We think that the initial work that the department has done in looking at data will guide them in the future, and we want to continue the use of putting science into our practices, evaluating where we are, see if it's working, and then making the changes that we need to do. So we want to encourage the department to continue with predictive analytics. We've looked at it in terms of child fatalities. It's also important for us to look at it where we have serious injuries. I would also challenge the department to look at things like chronic abuse and neglect cases, and also look at cases that move from family preservation to foster care and where we have reentry. Because if we are looking at our data and understanding what is bringing things back to us, then we can make those changes. And one of the first things that actually the department was able to do is years ago when they were doing the cold case work, they were able to identify some factors about what would be predictive of a child who would linger in foster care. So we think that that model of using data is quite helpful to all of us and encourage you to continue with that. Our second recommendation has to do with our family support practice to determine whether it is the appropriate model or it should be replaced, and that is obviously already underway, having heard of the retreat. But the challenge for the department is that they can make the changes top down, but it's not necessarily coming forward from the bottom up. So it's very challenging in that leadership role to get the staff on board and trained, because there tends to be resistance, because when you've had a new director every 8 months, the attitude often is, we don't have to do this because the next one will come along and do something different. So I think it's very important to get the message and the support out for Director Cagle so that there is adherence to the changes that are made from the top. The third is, with regard to safety, is that we have a loophole that exists when a child has been reported, an investigation is underway. The homeschool exemption is very broad, and there might be some way we could close the gap in terms of eligibility for homeschooling so that when a child is subject to investigation where there's been substantiated cases of abuse and neglect, that is not an option, because the school is a safety net for our children. And when you have a child who is suffering from abuse and neglect, and the person who's doing the abusing then becomes the provider of education for 8+ hours a day, then you're increasing that risk for those children. So we encourage that to be looked at as a way of enhancing safety. I've been fairly bold the way I handle that. If a case has already been petitioned and I've exercised jurisdiction, then I have the right to approve or not approve of the educational plan. And again, that's that judicial education piece. Our fourth recommendation is to adopt an unequivocal mandate that if an investigation is underway regarding a child, that there has to be contact with the child's school. School records are rich with all types of information. Your emergency contacts tells you who might be a potential placement for a child. Your attendance records can tell you when problems started to arise. Your academic records can show when there's been any kind of changes in a household. And your disciplinary records are frequently a means the child is communicating what their problems are. So we think that those records are vital to doing an effective job of analyzing a child's situation. The fifth recommendation, we've moved into a different area, and we're talking about permanency. And this is the point at which you should consider me begging. We need robust partnerships looking at faith-based partners, university partners, local schools, because we have to recruit, retain, and support and expedite approval of foster parents, respite caregivers, because we are in desperate need of foster parents. This is not news to Commissioner Cagle. He hears from me quite often on this issue, but again, I want to tell you the urgency of the need for more and better and supported foster homes. The next recommendation is that we do a very in-depth analysis of what we do have in terms of our private providers. What are their specialties? What are the gaps? What should be the standards of practice for those private providers, including making certain that we're developing appropriate therapeutic foster care services. Again, with a focus that we have limited resources. So we want to make certain when we're using those resources that we have the competencies that are needed and that we have the quality control that's needed, and that we're also letting our private providers know where we have gaps and that they may be able to make adjustments to what they're doing to be able to fulfill those needs. The seventh recommendation, again, is an area that's near and dear to the hearts of many, particularly when we have worked in such close work with Emory, with Dr. Claire Cole, with the Marcus Institute. And this is making certain that we are screening all of our children whenever the department has contact, whether it's through investigations, whether it's foster care, whether it's family preservation, that we are looking at fetal alcohol or fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, because these children are classified as developmentally disabled. That brings a stream of funding for them. It brings specialized services for them. They are an under-identified population, an underserved population, and the sooner that we put those developmental services in place, the greater success we're going to have. And if we're really going to be effective with our criminal justice reform, our fetal alcohol adults are the ones who are chronically in our system because they simply cannot follow the law. So I think that if we serve them better and identify them earlier and get the services we need, we have a much better chance of them being productive adults because we've recognized their areas of developmental disability and put in the services that they need. Our eighth recommendation has to do with the change in the law on diligent search. Diligent search in my career has changed many times. When I began my work, we did diligent search after we had terminated parental rights, meaning that we might have a child in a foster home 2 or 3 years, then identify a relative that was a total stranger and change the child to the total stranger. Well, we figured that that was bad practice, so we changed it around in the law and we did diligent search at the beginning of the case, and then we ended it. And then we ended up with children aging out of our system without families because we didn't keep doing diligent search. So then we did the new code and said, we're going to always do diligent search. And I went, wait, stop. That's not good policy. We need to do diligent search until a child does have an additional permanency option to reunification. But when a child has been in foster care for at least 6 months, when we're not making progress toward reunification, when no family members have stepped up and are willing to do it, family, friends, nobody, and you've got a foster parent who's ready, willing, and able to adopt a child, we need to be able to close diligent search and not pry that child away from a home where they are bonded and where they are wanted and placed somewhere else. So I think that although I understand because of cold case why diligent search must always continue until a child has a permanency option, if we don't close it, we're going to continue to do harm to children. The next category is well-being, and this is a very, very serious and important issue for our young people who do age out of our foster care system. Develop partnerships with private insurance industries to remove barriers for our older youth to obtain their driver's license. Crystal? I know you're proud of us. Our next recommendation, this is under the category of additional recommendations. Data, 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 data. We need to be collecting, analyzing, and using data to inform practice. It's important with regard to child fatality. It's important in terms of caseloads. It's important in terms of utilization of psychotropic drugs. It's important in terms of timelines from intake to investigations and first contact. All of these things help us in terms of, I like the first group's having a scorecard and knowing how we're doing. Our next recommendation is let's end Kenny A. We're spending $1 million a year in continuing the supports and things involved in that legal case. We have come a long way since the Kenny A litigation, and we would encourage to go ahead and negotiate that closed, get the federal court to close it down, and then we can reallocate and use that money for the other things that we desperately need. 12, again, they were repeating things that other people said. Utilize mobile technologies to support field knowledge and application of policy. FaceTime, Google Hangout, all of those things make it possible for someone who's supervising someone to immediately communicate in the field, look at things, and be able to provide feedback to some of our young and less experienced workers. So I certainly want to encourage the use of technology. And then lastly, we agree that our case management system doesn't do the things that we need it to do. It doesn't change as laws change. It doesn't change as best practices change. And we need a data system that has more flexibility. And in making my recommendations, I did leave out one thing. Diligent search. One of the things I would encourage the department to consider is this is a great way to employ retired law enforcement to help us find families for children. Investigators and people with a law enforcement background have tremendous abilities to track folks down that social work staff just doesn't have the time, skills, resources, knowledge that law enforcement does in being able to find people. So that's just a suggestion for a workforce that's out there that has an interest, a talent that we could utilize. And I would please ask my group to help me elaborate on anything that they think I need to say a little bit more about. Yes?
So my first question is under your, I guess it's the third recommendation. DFAC should adopt an unequivocal mandate for child protective services investigations to include contact with the child's school.
Yes.
What is there nothing currently in place there?
It's within the discretion of the investigator.
Okay.
And in some places it's done routinely, in some places it's not done at all. Now, again, it varies widely, and Bobby, you're in a much better position to answer that question than me.